and are just some of the words that you may hear in today's podcast. Enjoy! Hello and welcome to the Perfect Information Podcast, a board game podcast that roundly condemns that orange-faced cunt Donald Trump with me, Ben Maddox, and the person who's supposed to vet these intros,
Yorgos Panayotidis?
Well, morning, Georgie.
Yes, good morning. It is morning. We haven't sat around talking crap for 4.5 hours at all.
That's right, it's not actually early evening and we're all drunky-wunky off our own brains' heads.
Not at all, no. That's why we can sort of formulate these great sentences that totally make sense and are, within the limits of the English language.
Well, I've been thinking a lot, Georgios, recently about sort of the intention of our show and what we deliver to the people who listen to us.
Reasons to feel smart and superior to us.
Well, I think we offer cohesive, absolutely non-meandering, laser-focused precision, Georgios.
You know what Wittgenstein says about that?
What did he say about that?
I have no idea, that's why I'm asking you.
No, I've actually downloaded from Audible a Wittgenstein book, Georgios. It's called Ja, Bitte, or something. And I haven't listened to it yet because, well, it's one of those things you buy thinking, I'm all clever, but you never actually go through with it, do you?
Oh yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's like the instruction manual of IKEA furniture. It comes with a box, but you go, nah, I got this.
I never do because I recognize my own ineptitude at anything, Georgios. So I go through it rigorously.
See, this is where different perceptions come, or different perspectives come in. You are aware of your limitations. I am also aware of your limitations, but I completely ignore mine. Because
you don't have any, Georgios. I've seen you.
That is true. Yes.
I've seen you turning to different things with your hands and your brains.
Yes, multiple.
You repair things like a carpenter. You play football like Zidane. And I hear, though, I haven't witnessed it, you make love like Cassanunder. Well, anyway, what's interesting about Wittgenstein is he talked a lot about duration, Georgios.
Did he now?
And what's a synonym?
Wasn't it John Holmes?
Also.
Yeah.
And what's a synonym for duration, Georgios? Coming back to Johnny H.
I'm going to say length. Because you haven't written it down for me.
So what are we talking about this week?
We're talking about length. Kind of again, but differently. I think way back we talked about length as in how long do we keep games. But this time we're going to talk about what most people assume we were going to talk about, which is game length itself, like the individual games, like how long can a game last?
All right. So first of all, let's just go back. So board games, so if you look at other forms of art, if you look at the form of a novel, there's a sort of an established length. If you look at a feature film, there's an established length. Anything that goes below sort of 77 minutes for a movie is not considered a film anymore.
Yes.
But with games, talking about sort of popular culture, popular art forms, the variation in length is absolutely massive. Going from games that can last 5 minutes to games that can go on. A friend of mine was telling me about a war game, the African Campaign or something, which lasts about a year to play to its completion. Yeah, this is true apparently.
Actually, I have a game that's shorter than 5 minutes, actually. I have a game that's about, I'm going to say 30 seconds.
Which is?
Brawl, the card game, which is a real-time card game where you have a deck of cards that you try to play on one of 3 possible piles as fast as you can. But I think it's been out of print and back into print and probably can be found here or there. But yeah, it's a game that's far shorter than 5 minutes, about 30 seconds, 45 seconds if you're slow.
So why is length of game a factor? And what do these different lengths suggest about a game? Whether that be quality, whether that be seriousness, whether that be profundity, whether that be epicness. What do these different game lengths denote about games?
I think to a certain extent there's the idea that a short game is a casual game and a long game is more advanced, more challenging, more deep even. And while that's somehow a fairly superficial way of looking at it, it's not completely off the mark. I think there's only so much depth you can mine in 5 minutes of playtime. And there's by definition, any game that goes a certain length will feel deeper and more involved simply due to the fact that your decisions, your good decisions and your bad decisions, will have longer lasting consequences. My go-to example, and since it's been in the news, so to speak, recently, is always Twilight Imperium, because due to its length, your decisions have consequences, and because your decisions have consequences, so does your interaction with other players, and that's how the level of politics and diplomacy in TI3, which is how we old people call it, gains a certain an additional dimension to it.
So explain this to me. Why does length amplify consequence?
Part of it is very, very simply put, your decision is going to affect is going to be felt for a far longer time than if the game is over like 2 minutes later. If you're playing something like Love Letter, which occasionally can last quite a while, but it's a fairly simple game. Your decisions in one round are fairly simple, very small. The decision you make now will be resolved by the end of this turn, which doesn't last more than like a couple of minutes, and then it's reset again. So your decisions don't really carry a lot of weight in that sense.
Okay, so I want you to just a little sidebar on Twilight Imperium,
right?
Because my big criticism, about Twilight Imperium, because it's one of its sort of defining factors is the fact that it's long. People talk about this epic sort of 8-hour game or whatever. And when I played it the last time we played it together, it felt to me willfully long. I felt like you couldn't do certain things on your turn, and that just seemed to me a conscious decision to make the game longer, because someone had come to the conclusion that length equals epic. Can you defend this?
Yes and no. I think, well, first of all, I think what you might have in mind is the decision in Twilight Imperium to not produce units in the same turn you've built a space stock, which is where you can produce units. So basically you have to do it on one turn, and the following turn only you can produce something. It's something that's been rewritten somewhat in the new edition, so you might be happy to hear that. And I do agree with you that it does seem like a conscious decision. I'm not sure, with the intended purpose of lengthening the game so much as with the intended purpose of forcing players to calculate, to look ahead further, to sort of go, right, I'm going to do this turn and there's something else next turn. So in 3 turns from now, I can achieve that, which I think to some extent is a legitimate approach to designing or putting together certain rules, sort of forcing players to plan ahead. I do see your criticism though that it lengthens the game to such an extent that it often diminishes the enjoyment you get, because it feels like you have to wait for no other reasons than somebody put an arbitrarily phrased rule in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, am I just one of those kids?
Yes.
You know, they did that experiment with the kids and the marshmallows. And they said, you know, here's a marshmallow. If you eat the marshmallow now, you can have the marshmallow. If you don't eat the marshmallow now, you can have another marshmallow 30 minutes later. And they did all these things, and they said all the people who are successful in business, i.e. fucking psychopaths, waited for the marshmallow, so they got 2 marshmallows because they're greedy, hoarding fucking twats who sit in their big mansions with their fucking electric fences around, shooting people who dare to come near.
No, that was Ray Fiennes in Schindler's List.
Or feckless idiots like me just ate the marshmallow straight away. Am I just being, I want my marshmallow now, and the fact is that if I'm willing to embrace this submission to length, then in the long run I will benefit far greater.
Partly, yeah. I think partly there's a certain idea of delaying gratification through game length in TI3, in Twilight Imperium 3, because, yeah, that's basically what it is. You don't get to do this now, you have to wait your turn, you have to bide your time, you have to get something later. Whether this actually leads to more enjoyment or more fun, that's hard to tell. That's basically a gamble you have to take when you, design a game. You assume that this is going to be more interesting, more satisfying to players than just getting things straight away. I'm not sure whether there's a right or wrong answer there. It's a decision the designer makes in assuming that this is the kind of experience that I think will benefit the game as opposed to weaken it. And I think, the approach of saying, I don't want to wait that long. I don't believe there's that the game becomes more fun because I have to wait longer to get what I want as much. Well, that's just as legitimate as saying, I appreciate this sort of lengthening because it makes me think about more than just, one step ahead. I need to think about 4 or 5 steps ahead. And that is a pleasurable experience to me.
Oh, and that was the thing. That was the issue I had. I think the biggest issue, I think with Twilight Imperium 3, the first edition of Twilight Imperium 3, there's a card that's broken and you're basically put on rails of what you got to do, and the person who goes first wins the game. That wasn't my biggest issue with it. My biggest issue with it was a frustration that it seemed just long for the sake of being long.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. It's maybe
whereas I'm not naturally undisposed to long games.
Right.
I love Through the Ages, and a 4-player Through the Ages, no matter what people bloody tell you, can take 4 or 5 hours, and I absolutely adore that game. But I think it's this feeling that unnecessary length. So I find the Arkham games unnecessary long, unwieldy. 4 hours and essentially doing nothing, and 4 hours often because you're failing dice rolls. So if you have to get over a certain encumbrance and you're using pure output randomness to get over that, well, there are going to be times where you just simply can't because you roll dice and fate dictates that you can't get over that encumbrance.
Yeah, it
encourages the game to last twice as long, right? Which I find very frustrating.
Yeah, it was my main frustration with the dice mechanics and time stories as well. The idea that basically the dice decide whether you can go ahead or not. Yeah. Even if you know what you're supposed to do, if the dice don't fall the way you want them to, tough luck.
Because frankly, I can play Snakes and Ladders and that takes 15 bloody minutes and I get the same thing from it. If it's just, this is the problem I had with Seafall. I talked recently about Seafall. I did a review of it. And the issue I had with Seafall, right, is every game is too long. And the way that they make Seafall more difficult to win with subsequent games is they increase the amount of victory points you have to get to win. And so what they do is they increase the length of what is already a boring game. And that's absolutely fatal.
Yeah. If you're at the stage where you feel the game is boring, I don't think it really matters whether it's short or long. But I see where you're coming from. No, but generally, I think one thing I appreciate about Twilight Imperium, and I appreciate generally about longer games, is that your decisions matter. And I'm talking about they matter on a interpersonal level. Because if you are mean to a player in the first few turns, they will remember this for the rest of the game.
And do you think that length, it being a long game, helps this aspect to blossom and improve and become more enjoyable due to the fact that it could happen 5 hours down the line?
Which aspect do you mean?
That, players can allow grudges to fester and then they can play those combinations of things later on. And because it's taken so long to ferment and they've taken so long to build up to get to that point, it makes it even more exquisite. Revenge is a dish best served cold sort of idea.
Right. I think it's slightly the other way around. I think being aware that this is a possibility makes you more considerate of the effects your decision have on players as opposed to on the game state itself, which to me is basically a threshold where I judge a good gamer from a bad gamer. The moment that player of the game plays the game well, he does it the moment he or she takes into consideration how their actions affect other players and not just how their actions affect victory points or options or any of these sort of immediately game related questions.
Do these long games, these 18xx games, Twilight Imperium games, Through the Ages, you're more than welcome, by the way, to come on the guild and go, actually, every time we play Through the Ages with 27 people, it takes 42.3 minutes. You're more than welcome to do that. In my experience, it's bloody long with 4 people.
I think you have the wrong impression of our listeners. I think the only thing they're going to post is dick jokes.
I like that characteristic of our listeners. But do you think that these longer, more epic, if you want to use that word, although I don't really know what that word means, the games become something more than games? The sheer length makes them sublime into this other thing that is a sort of grand social experiment it turns into not simply a manipulation of components and mechanics, but a manipulation of those that are around the table with you.
No, I think you just define games. I can see why you draw the difference, but I would literally argue that.
It was a question, so yes, you're willing to.
No, I think the second part is what a game is. Everything else is a diversion, is, throwing mechanics at one another, sort of doing some sort of random decision-making process.
Well, then is this epic epithet that people ascribe to long games,
right,
the symptom of taking those things that characterize games and stretching them out over a longer period of time? That you're able to, those sort of social interactions are able to mature and ferment and change their character. And is this feeling of epicness, this sort of sense that it's not just the game and the situation, but it's the fact that you're getting hungry, you're going to break for fucking pizza soon, that if I don't do this now, then I might have to wait 3 hours to do this. And this epicness is actually this soup becoming more profound, deeper, like you leave a goulash on the stove and it always tastes better the next day.
Yeah, pretty much. I think long games are one way in which these moments that define good gameplay are allowed to blossom, are allowed to sort of breathe, are allowed to grow naturally instead of being just forced onto you because of certain rules. I think one of the main aspects, the term that keeps coming into my head in this context is story. The moment that a long game is more prone to creating something that feels like a story than a short game does. Some games, and those are games that I'm very, very excited about, manage to do that in a far shorter time. They don't have to rely on length and familiarity and the fact that you develop a certain short-term history over the length of the period of the game, length of the game, whatever. It sort of creates its own narrative, its own story, its own experience. It defines itself as being an experience as opposed to just being an activity. Yeah, like I said, a long game is one way to get to that point. One way to get to the moment where the game actually actualizes itself as a game experience as opposed to a puzzle. Like I said, some shorter games, as in 3 hours or less, manage to do that as well. And I'm very excited about those games. But in general, shorter games have a harder time getting to that point unless there's some very clever mechanics, some very clever presentation, or some other way to sort of get to the same point.
So would you say that games are truly actualized if we were to have this kind of acme of what we want from a game, where it is this true sort of stew of mechanics, over the table interactions, this indefinable magic of that sort of flow state when you're
circle,
in,
so to speak.
Yeah, indeed. when you're into something and it's just gratifying, it's just simply unashamedly, joyfully gratifying. Do you think that only games that are long can truly hit that nirvana?
No, I'm not willing to actually go that far to say short games could never reach that point. I think longer games I think longer games naturally strip away the artifice that we project onto a game. The idea that, no, it's just a game. Therefore, I'm not really engaging the other player. I'm just, the mechanics do these things for me. I'm not really sharing this experience with other players. It's the mechanics that I'm sort of invoking that do this for me.
And do you think then this is the attraction of campaign games, in that they sort of falsely evoke that sense of epicness? So you have games that interconnect, but they're games that last an hour and a half. Right. So actually what you're doing, you're actually playing a 7, 8 hour, 10 hour, 15 hour game, right, but you're doing it in chunks that are manageable. And so you're sort of faking this epic experience,
right,
over different parcels.
Yeah, I think.
Does Descent do that? Is that essentially what Descent is doing?
I think it is, yes. I think calling it fake is a bit harsh, but I do think it's
a compromised long game.
Maybe, yeah. Creating the experience of a long game without actually investing a lot of time in one sitting. Yeah, that's basically what they do. I think Descent does it. Gloomhaven does it as well. I think Gloomhaven assumes that you're going to invest a lot of time over time into that, and that's how the experience works. That's how the reward cycles in the game. The moment where you achieve something and you feel rewarded because of what happens or what you experience, they're stretched out over a longer period of time. It's not just, after 1 hour, you get your victory dance, you get your VP tally, and if you're the best or second best or whatever. It's over time as your character progresses, as a character grows, and eventually goes into retirement, that's the moments where you feel like, right, this is where everything pays off. Yeah, I think that's another way in which, length is sort of simulated, tries to give you an experience that you wouldn't otherwise get in 60 minutes.
All right, so I think we can all agree, both of us, all.
You are aware that whenever you say that, my immediate answer is no.
Well, yeah, but I'm going to say something, and you're going to disregard it anyway. It's just the enjoyable back and forth, Georgie. But I think we both agree that there is something almost unquantifiable. There is a feeling that when you sit back, having played something that is long, and this is with the qualifier that it's been engaging and enjoyable the whole way through.
Right.
There's a sort of physicalization of that feeling when you sit back after the last turn has been played where you go, wow, that was something, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in my experience, it's akin to the feeling I get when I've cycled 150k in a day. It's akin, I assume, to the feeling people get when they run marathons. Something, although I'm not comparing it to the same amount of exertion. There is that sort of endorphin release of having achieved something that is long, that is something to aspire to, something to truly savor and enjoy. Then can you explain to me why every publisher in the board game industry is talking about the 1 hour Euro?
Yeah, sure. New players who might not be familiar with what gaming can offer will probably back away from things that seem like too much of commitment, too much time investment or anything like that.
Well, are we then having our gaming decisions as hardcore gamers, which I assume we'd both sort of judge ourselves as if we're going to call ourselves anything?
Well, I think it's hard to argue that we are casual gamers if we're doing a podcast.
Right. So are we having our hobby torn away from us by these new casual gamers that are seeking to dilute the hobby with their short, shallow, useless games?
No. I think if anything, the industry is as much slave to profit objectives as any other industry is.
But don't you think the 1 hour Euro is actually slightly? I think it's slightly more noble than that. Don't you think the aspiration for the 1 hour Euro on the part of designers and publishers? Because what we forget, I think, especially with Asmodee and things like this, is that it's still a hobby industry. I mean, I was following Grant Rodiek on Twitter the other day.
Right.
And he's the guy who did Cry Havoc. Mm-hmm. And he's a computer game designer by day, I think.
Yeah.
He's 70-something within the computer game industry. And he was tweeting from a convention, a computer game convention. And he had these pictures up. And he said, you cannot understand the difference in scale between video games and board games, right? Mm-hmm. He said it's day and night.
Right.
And we forget that we're still actually within a niche hobby thing, even with Asmodee generating all this money. Within the grand scheme of things, it's very little. And so I think isn't there a more noble aspiration? The desire to try and deliver the TI3 punch in an hour.
Amongst designers? Sure.
You don't think so amongst publishers?
No.
But elaborate.
I think it's basically what I said. I think publishers, it's not supposed to sound mean. It's just I'm trying to be as matter of fact as I can. I think publishers are in the publishing industry because that's the business. The business is to not make money, but, produce content and stay solvent and live off the profits.
But it's not. I mean, I think we know a couple of publishers, right?
Yes. They're not opposed to money, though.
I'm not saying they're opposed to money, and everyone wants a ticket to the ride, right? Everyone wants a Magic the Gathering.
Right.
CGE, who continue, by the way, to do incredible games, incredible, long, involved, sometimes opaque games.
Right.
I'm sure were absolutely blown away by the success of Codenames, right?
I mean, definitely because we liked it that much. I distinctly remember.
I think it's specifically what we said about it.
Yeah, specifically, yeah. I think we were the only ones who praised the game.
I wasn't speaking to Vlada Chvátil,
right?
But I've had scenarios I've run through in my own head where he came up to me and said, frankly, if we'd have sold 1 billion copies and you hadn't have liked it, Ben, I'd have stopped producing the game.
Oh, no, actually...
You're the important one, Ben.
I remember something very similar. I got that from watching people take pictures of Vlada Chvátil. Yeah. And so I looked at his face and I could sort of read his mind. And he said very similar things, but he said my name.
Yeah.
No, obviously.
Except, I mean, he said it in a sexier accent when he was saying it to me.
Oh yeah, no. Oh, he was still clothed in my interpretation. So I think it evens out.
But anyway, yeah, they're not averse to money. No one is. But, I mean, there are probably ascetics that are, but they're weird. We don't want to talk about them. Consume people. Get out there. Consume.
Yeah, no, don't consume people. That's illegal.
Hey, look, if it improves my bottom line, Georgios, you eat that person's bollocks. But also, I'm thinking about a couple of publishers here that I know who aren't averse to money, but at the same time would not compromise their vision simply to have a bestseller.
Okay.
I'll name names
All
here, right? Gil.
Right.
He wouldn't produce a trashopoly game where, you're going around the board buying rubbish tips just to make a fuckload of money, right? If that proved to be a viable thing, if someone said to him, if market researchers said, "Oh, this is definitely going to sell you 1 million copies, you're going to be very wealthy," he wouldn't do it. Well, there is an integrity, a quality, and so what I'm trying to say here is that do you not think publishers share that idealism in this desire to find this game that packs this deep punch, but in a short time too, as well as designers?
I think only because it would sell.
You think that's simply the only reason?
Well, no, not exclusively. I don't think publishers are some kind of mutant creature that care nothing about the product they put out. I do think the viability of a commercial product matters to a publisher. It should matter to publishers. It's their responsibility.
I'm not denying that, though.
And I do think, Gil is in a very special position that he's both a publisher and a designer.
Well, he owns a boutique that's specifically structured around publishing his own games.
Right.
So maybe it's not the greatest example.
Yeah. But I think every publisher who takes on designs, develops them, and then produces them for the market does so in the understanding that they're looking for something that sells. They're looking at the market and seeing...
But that's not the only consideration, though, right? And this aspiration, do you not think that there is an aspect of the 1 hour Euro,
right,
something that offers an incredibly deep, rewarding play experience that gives you that same feeling that you get when you finally lift your aching buttocks off the saddle after 150 kilometers and you crack open that first bottle of beer and you gulp the whole thing down in one go and you feel it coursing through your veins, that evokes that same feeling. You don't think there's part of the publisher thinking, I want that, I want to find that. Not because it's going to make me £1 million. Listen to me, quaint me, £1 million. But it's not going to make you £1 million, but it's going to be a genuine service to an industry that I love.
No.
You don't think so?
No.
You don't think that publishers are enthusiasts too?
I think they're enthusiasts until it runs against the bottom line. And if they're enthusiasts against the bottom line, they're taking a very big risk and making they're not taking the responsibility seriously. As a publisher, I'm talking about the kind of person at the head of your publishing house, responsible for whoever is working for you and responsible for the brand that your publishing house stands for. And if you decide to go, right, I don't think this will sell, but I'm going to do it anyway because I think it's a worthwhile experience, then I don't think you're being a good publisher. I think you're being a great enthusiast. I think you might be even a great example of a pure gamer in a way, of somebody who really, really appreciates gaming as it is, but you're not being a good publisher. The responsibility of a good publisher lies in keeping things, in having a product that they can sell, looking for a product that they can sell, so the company keeps running.
Okay, so we have the 1 hour Euro. I'm using as an example because I hear it said a lot. A Euro that plays in an hour to an hour and a half. And I think the reason they say Euro here is because there is this perception that Euro games offer this profundity of gaming experience.
Right,
now, whether you agree with it or not is not the issue. I think that's the implication, right?
Right, yeah.
What inspired the desire for this then? When we've had, if you go to the 80s, Die Macher, which is I adore this game, and it's very deep and it's very complex and stimulating. No question, it's a Euro game whatsoever, but it's 3, 4, 5 hours. You have Twilight Imperium 3, you have Arkham Horror, you have Through the Ages, Civilization, the board game, all of these games that are long and long and long and very successful and very inspiring. What inspired the desire for the 1 hour Euro? Was it designers? Was it publishers?
It was Settlers of Catan.
Okay, elaborate.
It was basically
And what is it about Settlers of Catan that inspired this search for this holy grail of the best 1 hour Euro?
I don't think it's a search, but I think it is basically for to a certain extent the origin of this idea that you can pack a fairly not challenging, but sophisticated gaming experience that goes beyond roll and move and goes beyond just playing the right take that card at the right time, and put it all into a fairly short time frame. 60 minutes, 90 minutes, somewhere in between. What happened with Settlers of Catan and with Carcassonne and some other games in that vein is you had a whole new group of people, new market segments suddenly realizing, I actually have enough time, free time to do this. I remember enjoying games when I was younger, but I don't have time to play diplomacy for 8 hours.
It's always the criticism of Monopoly, right? It goes on all bloody day.
Yeah, it's also a shit game. That's part of it, yeah. I think the fact that you can have a game experience either with your family or with your friends or just, kids with each other is appealing without having to completely restructure your day as you would do with TI3, for example. That works. That opens up this product to a new group of consumers.
Which then promotes the following question. Are we being shortchanged? Is this desire for shorter and shorter games, not shorter and shorter games, that's not right, but this sort of sweet spot, this ideal length,
right?
Is that shortchanging us? Is that limiting the artistic expression?
Yes and no. No, in the sense of there's still a lot of games out there that are long enough to,
I just want to, because there's a game company that gets derided a lot, and I have my fair share of derision on their side, and I'm constantly surprised when they come out with new games and they don't conform to this idea of the hour and a half Euro, even though they're, this huge well-known company, and it's Fantasy Flight. They do not compromise on their desire to promote a certain experience in their games, and I admire that.
Well, yes, but keep in mind, both TI3 is now shaved off 1/3 of its play length, and the New Civilization game is now half the length it used to be. So it's not that they're completely resisting the idea of shortening their games. I think they're very much aware that the games that take too long won't get bought, but either through conscious choice, or if you want to be really cynical, limits of ability, there you can push an experience down to a certain length. Like the New Civilization game is supposed to take no more than 2 hours, which for a 4X game is unheard of.
But New Angeles is unapologetically long for the kind of game it is. Now, you may say that's a criticism against the game, but I see this, if you want to be fair to FFG, and I think you can be, I see this aspiration for them to produce a certain experience, and they don't compromise on game length to produce that experience.
Yeah, possibly. I think it's probably not that much of a consideration as other aspects, yeah. But then again, FFG has the luxury of being part of Asmodee North America, and as such, they have the luxury of producing TI4, which still with 6 hours game length is a huge game. And I don't think any other publisher would easily get the funds to produce a game that long, that involved, that massive, without some serious questions as to its viability on the market.
Okay then, so to finish up, are games getting too short? Back to my question. Is this search for the 1 hour Euro short-changing us? And are we being denied quality through this desire for time constriction?
I'm not sure we're being denied quality, but this focus on a certain game length based on financial concerns and market viability does mean that certain other experiences that might take longer aren't quite as frequent as they could be. I agree with you. Most games that I see, most games that seem to be coming out are somewhere between 1 hour and 2 hours. That seems to be the game length that everyone aspires to. And that will be the game length that we will get for the foreseeable future, I think, for the most part. There are outliers, of course. There will always be these big strategy games that take longer. I mean, keep in mind that What's Your Game's last release, Railroad Revolution, surprised everyone because it was that short. I mean, the other games were slightly longer. They were great fun, but they were slightly longer. They weren't that concerned with, being under 60 minutes. But Railroad Revolution, for example, which as far as I can tell has been quite a hit for them, is shorter because these games just sell to more people, appeal to more people. I don't think we're missing out so much as the constraints of the market basically lead to publishers being very hesitant to put out games that are too long.
And which is why I don't like to eulogize often, but which is why I'm quite sort of gratified that this is the hobby that I chose to take up, because it's still a hobby as opposed to a massive, massive industry. Because I think you're right. I think we will head in that direction where I've played a lot of Eurogames recently where I've come out at the end thinking that was 3-4 turns too short. I just couldn't do what I wanted to do and left feeling unsatisfied. But I know within this hobby there will always be someone, some crazy bastard somewhere who just doesn't care and will bring out these games that will let convention hang, desirability, purchasability hang. And I think as long as those people are still operating within the art form is still vibrant.
Oh, I agree, yeah.
In the tradition of literally every Patreon that's ever existed since the site opened about 3 years ago, this are our Patreon shoutouts. We're going to read names, then we're going to make up names that you, by law, have to go by now. Yes. And if you don't remember them, we'll come around your house and arrest you because we have meticulous memories.
Pretty much, yeah. I think by law, all legal documents must now be signed with these, handles.
And if you don't, as I say, if you don't, you'll be in trouble. 1984, George Orwell style. We'll pull your teeth out and put some rats in your pants.
I don't think you've read the book, have you?
It's a book? So, Georgios.
The first shout-out goes to Ivor Bolakov.
Ivor Bolakov, from now on, your name is Dangleman. Ulf Pearson.
Ulf Persson is a person, therefore he will now be known as that guy. Dave Moser.
Because you're moseying around, Dave, I'm gonna call you the Walker. Dan Hughes.
Dan Hughes, as you can tell, will now be known as Dancing Shoes.
Carry on, Georgia.
All right. I believe it's Isaac Shalaf.
Well, Isaac, I can't help it. You are Miserable Castle and Mike Poole.
He will now go by the very, very lame reference of Paul Newman. The next shout-out goes to Asker Samskranrud.
From now on, you are known as Bikerlicious. And the next one is Ben Osteen.
For your outstanding contributions to the world of the internet, will now be known as The Agitator. And of course, Chris Phillips,
who from now on is Moanman 3000. And, ooh, this is a girl's name. Simona Di Rubio.
Actually, you're going to be known in reference to your apparently very challenging name, The Disappearing Eye. And coming up next, a shout out to David Skoog,
who from now on is Skoogie, the coiffured and beautifully turned out Patrick Hillier.
He will now be known as Bateman. And of course, the world-renowned Mr. Tony Boydell,
who I'm going to call Tone Tones the Tony Man does whatever the catfish likes to eat.
Yeah, that is short and simple.
Remember that, Tony. Remember it.
You have to sign all your legal documents that way now.
Mandela FG. I assume it's not the real one.
What, there's a real one? What, yeah. There's a fake FG and a real FG?
Exactly.
Oh.
And the real FG is one hell of a motherfucker.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you're going to be haha. No, that's the shout out, basically.
Yeah, remember your name. It's haha.
Yeah, it has to be nasal and loud and you need to point at things, but anyway. And of course, Ray Black III.
You're going to be known as Pointless Appendage to Your Name. Oh, and Will Brasher.
Who will be known as I Hardly Know Her. Followed up by Curtis Cushman.
He smoked a weedo. Jason Paterson.
Which is obviously a very, very shortened word for somebody's son. And then there is, of course, Mike Taylor,
who I'm going to call Creates the Trousers. He's certainly a man from Sweden. He's Joel Peterson.
Also known as the wind that shakes the tree down the hallway or something. The very highly esteemed pledger Robert Williams,
I'm going to call him Not That Twat from Stoke and Stephen Sirek. It's a very exotic sounding name.
Will now be known as Man Who Does Not Shave for Picture. It's his Native American name.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. Followed by Otto Jensen.
I'm going to call you Jenny Jenner. Jenny Jen of the Jenner. Are we going down Jenner's place? Oh, let's go down Jenny Jen of the Jenner's place. He's got a lovely house. Really? How does he get all the money? Well, you know, Jenner, Jen of the Jenner. He just don't say nothing.
Actually, unfortunately, that's the name of the next Fiona Apple album, so we can't use that.
All right, let's just go with Jenner then.
That works.
We have, last but certainly not least, Karine Zaman.
She will now be known as Karine Abdul-Jabbar.
Well, let's hope that you remember that, because I've catalogued them in the files of my brain. And if anyone else would like to have this treatment, which I assure you feels very cleansing and sexual, patreon.com/perfect information.
Also keep in mind, however, it doesn't matter how much you pledge, you're still going to get a nickname. You can't avoid it. I'm very sorry, it's just, the way it's set up. It was, we're bound by Patreon, terms to do that.
Well, anyway, Georgios, I'm going to go off down Jen Jenner's house for a couple of bowls of treats.
That sounds naughty.
Is that your name on the list? Well, get in there then. Get to the bar and get buckled. Welcome to the guild.
You're huffing. Are you puffing? Are you going to blow the house down?
What was the question, Georgios?
The question. Al questione. What does punishing in board games mean to you, and is it confined to certain genres? Are we not going to have any banter beforehand?
Just get on with it, will you?
Alright. Fair enough. You seem tense.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. Get on with it. Just read the bloody thing. There's things there to read. Just bloody read it. Get on with it.
Jason Patterson. Patterson?
Oh, Patterson. That's how it's pronounced, isn't it? Georgios Costas. That's how it's pronounced, isn't it? Jason Patterson. Oh, yes. You pronounce it Patterson like you spread it on toast. That's right.
I like punishing games, but I preferred when they derive their rigors from challenging gameplay choices as opposed to player-inflicted punishment. And he actually gives an example. Being able to play a card that destroys my opponent's wheat production or having a bomb dropped on my factory by a player, I don't usually find those types of combative interactions very fun. They create a lot of negative emotion, which I think is an interesting observation. Well, it's
clear, right? We all hate the man. We all fight against the man.
Which man?
The man, Georgios.
The man?
Dylan sung about him, probably.
Really?
Yeah, all through the 60s, all of that fucking nasal bullshit he did was all about the man, wasn't it? I'm on the pavement, getting out my testicles, she's in the bum, sicking at the ruckamuls. It was that song he wrote, wasn't it?
Your knowledge of pop culture and especially music is, again, astounding.
Exactly, and it was all about the man, so we can accept the game punishing us. It's more acceptable than having someone else turn around and kill us. We can go, well...
yes, generally I'm more accepting of games not working out than being killed, yeah, I agree.
But the game is... The game system being hard is more acceptable than someone else, than this feeling that someone is just wantonly destroying you, right? It's easier to deal with.
But why?
Because it doesn't feel like... Because we're all prone to our own insecurities and we all have this notion that maybe people don't like me as much as I think they do. And
no, they don't.
But if someone targets you, it's sort of an affirmation of all of those insecurities, and it evokes this sort of angry reaction, or can at least. Whereas if the game system is doing it to you, it's doing it to other people too. So there's this sense of equity. We're all in this together. And so that's much easier to deal with than it is... If the game's hard and punishing, it's easier to deal with than if someone's punishing you, right?
I don't know if it's easier to deal with, but I've had experience where I was mad at a game because it was arbitrarily just, making my life difficult, or not my life, obviously, but my play experience difficult for no apparent reason. And I'm not sure it's easier to deal with so much as there's less consequence in blaming the game or the designer than it is in blaming the person sitting right across from you.
Well, that's true, isn't it? If you can turn around to the whole table and go, this fucking game's an asshole, right?
Yeah.
And that's full of less consequence. I mean, unless you're sat with a designer, right? Of less consequence than if you turn around to someone and go, "You're a fucking asshole."
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, although I tend to say that to a lot of people in games. I said that we were playing Clank last night.
I used to think that, this is the English way of saying hello, but somebody pointed out that it isn't. It's the Welsh way.
Exactly. And it's my quarter Welshness coming through. We were playing Clank last night, and we had the first dragon attack, and someone went into the bag, and they drew 3 of my fucking cubes out, right?
That's bad.
And so my exact quote was, "You are a fucking asshole," was my exact quote.
Well, yeah, but again, I mean, to add some seriousness, I think in this case, it's a random choice. I think what Jason's talking about here are these moments where somebody deliberately chooses to attack you and undermine you and sort of push you on into the defensive, and you're not quite clear why. I think it's in most games where you can see the attack coming, you can see why you're being attacked, and you go, all right, I'm speaking from my own experience. If I'm in first place in a game and somebody attacks me,
you kind of understand.
I understand that it's legitimate, it's fair, and if I wanted to push to first place, I take that risk to have that huge bullseye on my back. It's when I'm in last place and I get picked on, or when even I'm in about the same place as the player attacking me, then that's where I go, is this something else? These are the moments that are frustrating to me, where I feel that there's no justifiable reason.
It seems wanton.
Yeah,
willful.
Willful, yeah.
Malicious.
Pretty much, yeah. And
I sleep with your wife, and so you decide to destroy my bloody grain silo in the game. All I did was sleep with your wife. Frankly, we'd had a couple of glasses of wine. She's a good-looking lady,
right?
And one thing led to another.
Two things. A, I don't know what you're talking about, and B, you're well. Moving on.
What I think the important question here, though, is Jason Paterson,
which is now his name,
a naturist
because of his?
Well, he's called Naked Meeple. Now, does he only ever play games with sort of natural wood-coloured meeples, which makes it bloody difficult if you play multiplayer games?
I'm very sorry to correct you.
Or is he saying, "I'm a naked man, I wave my balls at the people"?
No, that's I think that's a local Canadian accent. It's supposed to be naked me, people.
Okay, you're gonna have to.
People is a Canadian slang term,
right,
for buddy.
So what's the naked bit?
Naked me. It's an encouragement to undress him.
Oh, so he asks all of his friends to remove his clothing.
Yeah, he's probably is
it a sex thing, or does he just have bad arms?
I think he's just very lazy.
Oh, right, okay. Well, that's cleared that up for me.
Yeah, it totally cleared it up.
All right, let's go to Matt Green from Canada, one of England's satellite states, to the actual state of England, where they vote the racist parties.
You have multiple racist parties that
UKIP and the fucking Tories, Georgios, yes.
Oh, fair enough.
Multiple.
Yes, he brings up Antiquity by Splotter. Splotter? It's, I quote, "It's synonymous with punishing in as much as it is the bar to measure other games by. In terms of genre, it's best described as medieval corpse management." He provides us with a quote, so this is a embedded quote, a quote of a quote. "It's punishing, but it's not antiquity." Or, "It was a bit punishing."
Like antiquity?
Oh, hell no, it wasn't that bad.
That was some good acting there, wasn't it?
Thank you.
I'm a professional. So why I think this is interesting to talk about is that a recommendation for a game? That it is the dictionary definition of punishing? I mean, for sure. I mean, actually, to be honest, it's piqued my interest. I want to give it a go just to see. The masochist in me just wants to see how bloody nasty it is.
I think it's a recommendation the same way that saying this sauce is really, really spicy. Really,
right,
really
exactly,
hot.
Yeah.
It will appeal to some people. It will be a clear sign to stay away from others. Occasionally, people will go, "I wonder how spicy it really is."
Has it piqued your interest? I mean, it's piqued my interest like a motherfucker.
No, not really, no. I think for the most part, I've heard this game mentioned a lot of times, so I had it on my radar as something I might at some point, if I see it on the table, I might have a closer look. But no, the fact that it's very, very punishing doesn't in itself make it of interest to me.
I mean, I'm naturally predisposed to Splotter games. I played one, and I think it's a genius piece of work. And the other ones, because they are right, they're truly the sort of enthusiasts' game, the Splotter ones, right? Because they're impossible to get hold of. They're super expensive. And all of the people in the know tap their fingers to their nose and go, oh yes, you've got to try Mango Django by the Splotters. It's a real hell of a game. And I desire to be thought of better, Georgios. I am a walking, shivering shamble of insecurity. So
is that Cthulhu reference? The shivering, I mean, and the shambling.
And interestingly enough, I do have tentacles coming out of my face.
Yeah, you kept telling me that's a beard.
It's dreadlocks. It's beard dreadlocks. I'm going for a new thing, Georgios.
Yeah, bedlocks.
Bedlocks, indeed. So, yeah, I mean, that really piques my interest, but I just wonder whether that's a compliment or whether that's... I think it's a wry compliment, right?
I don't know. I think I wonder whether within the gaming sphere there's a game-related idea of machismo. The idea of playing either very long games, very, very punishing games, or even very contentious games, like for a long game, TI3, for example, or Mega Civilization. For a contentious game, something like Diplomacy.
Well, Mega Civ is all about fucking bravado, right? Mega Civ is all about gamer bravado.
Right.
I'm signing up for a session of Mega Civ. It's going to be done over a weekend. I'm simply doing it because I want to give it a go. Right. And I want to say I've got to the end of it and I've played it. It's pure gamer dick swinging.
Yeah.
And I have no issue with that. I think that's...
Well,
I have no issue with it.
In general, it's fine. I think it can go overboard occasionally.
I absolutely don't...
It may end up in pure snobbishness, but other than that, yeah.
I mean, I certainly have no aspirations for my Mega Civ game to be enjoyable. I don't imagine it'll be fun. I just am, but it's kind of something you have to do, right?
I'm going to do this, not because I want to, not because I enjoy it, but because it's hard.
I mean, that's why
I'm basically living JFK's dream here.
That's why I bought Diplomacy.
Right.
Because I'd heard all of these things, that it was the most contentious game, it broke up friendships, and I thought that really appealed. I actually fucking love Diplomacy. I think it's a little long, but I love Diplomacy. I think it's great fun, and I think I never got angry at it, and I think it models a wonderful sort of, it's a wonderful social experiment that demonstrates human nature. But my original interest...
That's literally why I hate it, because people believe that. But that's a topic for another day.
But you know, it was that original contention that piqued my interest.
Right, yeah.
Punishing is appealing, and yes, it is gamer bravado. Okay, so moving on to the kindest of all the fortresses.
We need to find a bad dumb joke about his name, though.
There's a lot of fortresses. Oh, quickly, just as a sidebar, what did Tony Boydell say, Georgios?
Wait. I'll find it in a second. There it is. Reducing the listenership by 40% to 8 means you had a starting listenership of 13.3 recurring, 1/3 of a person. How can that be? And you helpfully suggested that I would count you as a third of a person, which is of course not true.
Fifth of a person.
Now that's racist. But
you missed something off the beginning there, Georgios.
Commencing thread hijack and 3.
No, that's afterwards. Right at the beginning, the first thing he says in the sentence.
Yodros is on. It's a bit smeared on my.
Oh right, so you got a bit of sauce on your screen.
Yeah, spicy sauce.
All right, so we're going on to Isaac Shalev, the kindest of all the fortresses. If you line up all the fortresses, there are some that are scary. There are some that are fairy tale, but there's one in the middle where it's got a couple of windows and a portcullis that is designed in the shape of a opening, gracious smile, and you think, wow, that fortress, which is ostensibly built as a military structure, looks very kind. I bet if I go in there that I'll get soft marshmallowy pillow-like cakes.
See, it's this assumption that leads to you getting your ass kicked in on that Through the Ages game you're playing with him.
Yeah, he's a real brutal person on Through the Ages. Anyway, what does Isaac Shalev, Ender 7, which I don't know what it means, say?
Isn't it a reference to that sci-fi young adult book, Ender's Game?
I'm sure it is. I don't read the nerd stuff, Georgios, because I'm a cool dude.
And you can tell by the fact that you need to pronounce it that's definitely true.
Yeah, definitely. If you're telling people you're cool, that means you're double cool.
Definitely. He says he finally listened to the episode.
Finally. Get on it, Shalev.
Oh, actually, there's more to that. I didn't read that. He points out that the discussion of punishing is suggesting a moral dimension is interesting. To a certain extent, the god of victory points is the god we choose for ourselves when we enter the magic circle of competitive gaming. In that world, playing poorly is a moral failing of a sort, and the greatest moral failing is probably king-making. The player who makes suboptimal moves on purpose is the lowest kind of wretch to the worshippers of Nike, not the shoe, you Philistines.
Yeah, but if you pronounce it Nike, people don't realise it's Nike, because it's spelt Nike, because Nike was named after the Roman god of victory, goddess of victory.
I'm going to punch you in the face if you call her Roman again.
Nike?
Yeah.
Greek, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, they're all the bloody same, aren't they? The toga.
So you do want to get punched in the face.
Those toga people. Carry on.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because that sort of follows my observation as well. The fact that one of the reasons why kingmaking annoys people so much is because of this underlying assumption that, you know, you are doing this wrong. You're breaking some
the moral code.
Exactly. The same as playing suboptimal moves, yeah, because they refuse to buy into this worship of victory. This utter submission to doing everything you can to win the game.
I think what's really interesting, though, is what he follows on to say is that games are becoming more immediate and easier.
Right.
And more accessible in that way. What they are offering is less scope for improvement. Mm-hmm. So he goes on to say, like, these older games, and he uses Through the Ages as an example. You play them once and you get absolutely trounced, and you learn very quickly you have to monitor your military, otherwise you're gonna get trounced, right? And so what these more punishing, more difficult games offer you is greater scope for improvement, play over play, whereas the consequence of making games that are instantly accessible, instantly enjoyable, is that you can be very good at them when you instantly approach them. Right. And so there's less scope for improvement. Which, do you think he has a point there? I think it's very interesting.
I think it's an interesting point. I'm not sure of the value of providing games that allow you to improve. Carries. I think there's a verb missing in that sentence. I'm not sure that a game that allows you to improve over time inherently provides some sort of value that should be lauded or should be sought after, should be celebrated, whatever you want to call it. I think it's just something that some games do, yes, and they risk.
But you don't think that's an aspiration? I mean, I want a game that I find it has to be enjoyable. There has to be something in there that's fascinating and a hook, but to a large degree is opaque and difficult when I first approach it, and that rewards my time with improved performance. That's what I want from games.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't think I share that. I think I don't mind getting better at games, and you're right, if I enjoy a game, even though I'm bad at it at first, I'll probably enjoy it over time as well as I get better. But the fact that I do get better at a game, I'm not sure it motivates, it sort of pushes the game up in my evaluation. I think a game is better because it allows me to improve.
But I think the longer the game, I think it comes back to our discussion, the longer the game, the more challenging you wish it to be, right? The more scope you have to improve within it. If a game is a promenade and it's an 8-hour promenade, where you just get to do absolutely bloody everything you want and you're very good at it. Because I think the point is, if you approach a game and you've never played it before, and you're very good at it, well, it's not you who's very good at it, is it? No, it's the game allowing you to be very good, facilitating you to perform exceptionally well, which is not due to your skill, it's due to the skill of the designer.
I don't follow. I know, I'm...
Well, I mean, simple, right? It's simple.
But the fact that I did something well does not mean I only did it well because somebody let me do it well.
Well, the fact if you're completely unfamiliar with something and you come up to something and you're super duper at it, either you're a savant or there's something else at play. Because if you're completely unfamiliar with it and you happen to be very good at it, either the game is very forgiving and allowing you to be good, or, as I say, you're a savant. And I would suggest that neither of us are savants, right?
No, I think... pseudo-intellectual name drop. I think that's the fallacy of the excluded middle.
Oh, come on then, because I don't know what that is.
Basically, you're describing two extreme cases and ignoring the fact that there's a lot of room in between those two cases.
Okay.
I think you have to keep in mind, when one of us approaches a game now, we might not know the game in detail, but we know enough about games and we know enough about related or similar games that we can infer a lot of what is a good strategy as opposed to what's a bad strategy.
Okay.
I think we come with a lot of prior experience and that we bring to the table that allows us to be pretty good at certain games right out of the gate.
But okay, I guess what I'm talking about then is if you kind of get to do everything you want. You approach a game for the first time, you've never played it, someone else explains the rules to you, you sit down and you play it, and just you do everything you need to do.
Right.
No. Everything you want to do. You come out at the end of the game thinking, bloody hell, I wanted to do X, Y, and Z, and I did X, Y, and Z, and there was very little obstacle in front of me, and I came out of it looking like a bloody genius at this game. Suggests to me the game's a little easy.
I don't know. I don't know about easy, but I do know I've had similar experience where I sat down, played a game, did what I thought I had to do, and apparently didn't fare fairly well, and I came away thinking, I have no great desire to revisit this game.
Are you a savant?
I don't think so, no. I just have played a bunch of games.
Well, all right then, Georgios, or should I bloody call you bloody Costas? I'm going now.
Right, is that my Cockney name, Bloody Costa?
I'm going. Oh, don't crack jokes. You hear you with a. I bet that's how you manage to bloody do it, isn't it? I bet that's how you manage to do it with your witty jokes and your swept back hair and your bloody musketeer beard. Oh, yeah. I bet that's how you manage to do it. Well, thank you for all you've done.
Oh, yeah, you're very, very welcome.
Say good night.
No. I'm kind of liking this vibe here. Let's order another round of drinks. It's on you.
I'm Nick Mariner, and this is the Board Game Professor. Everyone, welcome back. It's been a long time. It's been almost a month, I think, and if I'm not mistaken, in the last month, nothing has happened. It's been quite a month in the sort of globosphere that we live in. The world's gone a little crazy, and in particular, something's been going on in the news that's made me want to talk about a particular concept on this show. I was going to get into a response about ethics and board games and sort of move it more into this conversation about Nietzsche and power and thinking about what Ben and Georgios talked about on the last episode. But a particular thing in the news has had this idea on my mind, and I think this outlet is one of the best places to talk about it. So here it goes. First, let's talk about the game I want to talk about this week, and that is a game called Twilight Struggle, which you probably have heard about since it is sat for a very long time as the number one game in the entire world on the BGG rankings, eventually to be displaced by Pandemic Legacy Season 1, and is now actually third underneath Through the Ages, which I talked about the last time I was on the show. Twilight Struggle is a Cold War, I don't know. I'm not sure you'd call it a simulation as much as you'd say a Cold War themed game. It's a two-player game in which one player plays the United States and the other player plays the USSR, and you are vying for power across the map. And the way that you're going to do this is there are little squares all over the board, all over the entire map of the world. And everybody has a certain amount of influence in each region, and you're going to play cards out of your hand, and you're going to play these little chits on the board, and eventually you're going to sway that particular city or country, I can't remember how it works, it's actually been a while, toward either your favorite, the US or the USSR. And the game ends when somebody has sufficiently dominated the other one, or there's another way you can end the game in which there's a DEFCON track, and as it goes from 5 to 1, DEFCON 1 being the brink of all, nuclear catastrophe. The game actually will end under the understanding that somebody's dropped a bomb and now the entire world is dead and both players lose. So there's a bit of a cat and mouse element to that, the way that DEFCON track works. Especially because it's actually, for me, I think the game is good. I think it's certainly worthy of praise. I'm not sure I would call it number one game of all time good, but it's certainly a game in which if one player knows what he or she is doing and the other one doesn't, you get your butt just handed to you. I played with the first time I played with somebody who knew the game well, and he just cranked the DEF contract down to 2, and really tied my hands behind my back on what I could do, because it's very hard to then take actions, because you don't want to be the one that triggers the end of the world. But throughout the game, you're going to be playing cards out of your hand. It's a card game, and these cards can either be played for their operations value, which allows you to position things around the board, or you can play them as events, and they are actual historical events that happened across the Cold War. And it is a game that, in one way, tries to reenact the development of the Cold War with specific events and things like that, but in another way sort of teases the idea of this alternate history. What if the USSR wins? Because you can, if you are the Soviet player, you can win the game and officially win the Cold War, which I suppose theoretically they lost, although they don't seem to be doing too bad for themselves lately. I mean, they won our election here. That's pretty impressive, to win an election from another country. Here's what I want to talk about. And I chose this game. I could have chosen a lot of games, but I chose Twilight Struggle for a particular reason. But there is a concept in historical studies advocated by or advanced by a scholar by the name of Pierre Nora, who's a French guy, and he wrote it. Started as an article, and then he wrote a 3-volume work where he sort of showed this idea in practice. But I believe it's pronounced Lieux de Mémoire. I don't speak French, so if I'm butchering that, I apologize. But in the English translation, I think, is Sites of Memory. And what he argued in this idea of this concept of sites of memory is that oftentimes actual places or objects become frozen in time by the way we continue to tell the narrative of them. So, for instance, I use this concept a lot in my dissertation, talking about the histories of schools and the sort of narrative of a school, because the school is always there. The history of it gets told and retold again, and retold another time, and to where that becomes canonical. It becomes true because we've all heard the story so many times. That's what museums do. Museums will tell a very specific narrative of a place or an object or a thing. And even though that place or object or thing's place in time was amorphous and layered and complex, the idea that Nora had is that in retelling its history in a very specific way over and over again reduces that place or thing to only one version of itself. There could be so many versions of a thing, but to only focus on one particular aspect of it reduces it to a singular narrative or a singular version. And I don't think at this point it should be, I would hope at this point it's obvious why I've decided to talk about this week, as opposed to going back to some of the ethics, because here in the United States we are having a little bit of a problem with our monuments. Right now, there are a lot of them coming down, and there are a lot of people hurting one another over in the name of keeping those monuments, and those are the monuments to the U.S. Confederacy. Look, I'm not from the South. I've lived in the South now for 10 years. I have no particular affinity to it. I'm not even going to entertain the conversation of heritage versus hate, that sort of bullshit dodge, because what I want to focus on with the idea of these monuments fit the description of the sites of memory that I'm talking about, that Pierre Nora advocated. That a monument is an honorific. It is a statue erected to remember a particular person in a very particular way. And so when you erect a monument to, say, Robert E. Lee or Jefferson Davis or Stonewall Jackson, you are taking somebody whose cause was not noble. It was in the name of fighting to maintain a slave-holding society. And to create a monument for that person is to remember a very specific version of him, and a heroic version, and an honorific version, and a noble version. And that's why people want them to come down, not because we don't want to talk about the muddy history of the United States, but we don't want to see a unfortunate and costly moment in time celebrated through the honor of monumentation. And that's the struggle that we're having here. But I love this idea of applying sites this critique, this sites of memory critique to those monuments, because it helps us understand that they are there specifically to crystallize a version, a narrative of history. And in this particular mode, it's a very rosy narrative. Now, let's take all of this back to Twilight Struggle. And this is where I think the sites of memory idea, I've been thinking about how this can work for board games for quite a while. How it can help us understand a little bit better about how board games work. What I think, and what I would argue, is that when you have a game that is attempting to reenact or possibly simulate, but certainly engage a historical moment in time, that game, the way the game design works is to engender a very specific version of that moment in time. So if you take a look at something like Twilight Struggle, that is a game that spans from the late 50s to, I think, the late 70s, or maybe, I can't remember if it goes all the way into the 80s, Berlin Wall and all the Gorbachev and Reagan stuff. I can't remember. Like I said, it has actually been a while since I played it. I probably should have given it a once over. That is a game that spans 30 years by that estimation. And it is a game that's entirely about Cold War politics and nuclear paranoia. Those things did exist. Those things are a lens through which we could look at those 3 decades. Post-World War II to the end of the 80s was a constant tension between 2 global superpowers, and everyone holding their breath hoping they don't start throwing bombs at each other. And the Bay of Pigs invasion in the 13 days, the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's all sorts of ways in which the Vietnam War, the Korean War, all sorts of moments in which that is a verifiable telling of those 3 decades. But those 3 decades were also full of all sorts of other stuff. That was the birth we saw. Those decades gave us the birth of rock and roll. Those decades gave us, a massive expansion in television, and television is part of our lives, and that, of course, does feed into the Cold War. But none of that is in the game because the game makes it about global politics and the Cold War. And so I think, or what I would like to argue, is that one of the things that historical games do are reduce an era to a specific narrative. And in the case of Twilight Struggle, the narrative of that 30 years in time was a narrative of constant, embattled political tension, which is true some. But it's not the full truth of everyone's lives. I mean, most people who lived, born from 50s and onward, I'm a little too young to remember most of this. I was born in the very early 80s, so even by the time the Cold War ended, I was still just a kid who was entirely unaware of it. Think about your own childhood. If you did grow up in this era, you are aware of some of this going on, but not necessarily. It isn't your entire every waking moment thought process. You're going to fall in love and get your heart broken. You're going to be hungry sometimes and have to find food. You're going to, play baseball or whatever else. And all of this might have been in the backdrop, but certainly you wouldn't think across those 3 decades as nothing but Cold War global domination. So what I find interesting and what I wanted to talk about this concept is I think it's interesting to think about the way that games, board games in particular, when they are historically themed, must choose a version of history in the way they theme and then design the game around that theme. You must pick a narrative of the past. And that game then, the game becomes its own site of memory. It becomes its own version of the past, its own telling of the past in the way that it asks you to play the game. And I'm not saying this as if it's a bad thing. I am saying it, however, as to open a dialogue of there might be other ways to think about it, the history that the game is telling. So like if you want to use Twilight Struggle in a classroom, that would be a useful device because it's chock full of historical events, but you would then need to talk to your students about what part of history is this game trying to tell, and what part of history is this game failing to tell or choosing not to tell. That is where I think a historical board game is useful as a teaching tool, as a learning device, is both the information it provides you, but thinking specifically about the story it's trying to tell about history. All right. That's what I wanted to say. I got through it. And almost record time. I'm so proud of myself. It is very good to be back on the show. I've missed you all. I've had fun talking on the forums with you and playing an online game with some of you, which we won't go into, but I am crushing it. All right, that's it. I'm Nick Mariner on Twitter at The Good Mariner. Thanks for listening.
This review is brought to you by Brettspielgeschäft.de.
Best selection of English language board games in Berlin.
It's crass, unsophisticated, and emotionally manipulative.
It's this week's review.
It is the distant future. The medical sciences have seen incredible advances. We have even conquered the common cold. The only thing we still struggle with is the question of timing. As medical professionals, you will have to deal with emergency cases, patients awaiting treatment, and of course equipment failure. We may have conquered death, but not the urge to profit through cost-cutting measures. Luckily, you are not alone in this. Your colleagues will aid you, and you them, and us all, together. Goo. Consultation with your fellow doctors is paramount, but the ever-tumbling vagaries of fate will force you to improvise. Within 60 seconds each shift, 60 seconds each shift. If you fail, your reputation will suffer, your self-esteem might take a hit, and yes, your patients will flatline.
Yeah, skip to the end.
It's the one-sentence review.
Flatline is a visceral, confusing negation of the power of forward planning, and is all the better for it.
Once the adrenaline rush wears off, Flatline reveals itself to be a fairly simple dice game with arbitrarily tacked on rules and components that, while not quite unnecessary, do feel unpolished.
Georgios? Ooh, what's that in the corner of the room?
I don't know, but it's eating peanuts with its nose.
The thing is, it's really interesting, Georgios, because I assumed previously we were looking at the elephant when it came in the room.
Yes.
In real time. But I realise now that was all an illusion. And it wasn't until afterwards that I realised now. Oh, look, Georgios, there it is. It's coming in. It's trunk there. It's wearing a sexy Halloween nurse's outfit. And we're talking about the elephant in real time.
Have you started huffing paint again?
Yeah, I mean, lots of it.
I see.
I've started redecorating the house. When I say redecorating, what I mean is opening the paint tin, huffing the paint for 3 hours, and then waking up covered in paint.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes, yeah.
It's like that Stone Roses cover from the early 1990s, Georgios.
I'm huffing the paint. Please don't hate me.
That's one for the kids.
Right,
so
yeah.
what's the elephant in the room?
It is probably the real-time element that, unlike other games that sort of pride themselves on the real-time element, only comes sporadically in this game.
Right.
Most of the game happens outside of that real-time element. Well, not most of the game, but, a lot of meat of the game happens outside of the real-time element. At least that's how I experienced it.
Well, it's that, I think it's that development of real time, right? In that you have something like Escape, you have something like Space Cadet's Dice Duel.
Right.
Where the whole game is real time. It's that concentrated 10, 30 minutes in the case of Dice Duel that's all real time and then the game's over. Whereas, as you say, it's just burst. And I think that is maybe what they've done is they've taken the criticism of these real-time games and said, fuck me, it's exhausting. And so they've tried to parcel out that sort of stressful, intense element into manageable chunks.
Oh yeah, no, that's, I think that's definitely one of the strengths of the game, that, because of it being parceled out, you have these bursts, you have an ebb and flow, you have an up and down in this game. There's a certain, a bit of a sense of momentum happening as the game progresses. You're building up towards something, and it works surprisingly well. The fact that it's just 1 minute of intense action, and then you have times of release. You can sort of come down again. You can plot out what to do next, what to focus next, argue about which fire you need to put out is actually the biggest one, the biggest threat to the game or to the group. So I think that works surprisingly well. And unlike other games that sort of are defined by this real-time element, it doesn't feel like you're kind of put under pressure, but it's a very manageable kind of pressure.
Is this a reaction? Every bloody cooperative game has this thing, right?
Right.
Where that it's trying to solve the alpha player problem.
Oh, I can't.
No, I think that as a criticism bores the shit out of me. You're playing with an asshole. It's not an alpha player.
Exactly.
The person's an asshole, right? And so, do you think that this real-time element is an attempt to solve that problem, which I don't believe exists?
Yes.
Is that why it's there?
I maybe.
So there's a lack of control. So you can't have one guy go, no, because you just simply don't have the time.
Oh yeah, no, I think to some extent that is true. I think the so-called problem of the alpha gamer is overblown, I think, and has, and a lot of designers are sort of trying to tackle it, and I feel that it's not the job of the designer to rewrite the game in such a way as to keep an obnoxious player from sort of controlling everybody else.
Don't try and control the asshole. You're wasting your time. I mean, it's always that thing about Pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So when I played Pandemic Legacy, I played my first couple of sessions just me and another person, and it was wonderful. Very equitable.
Yeah.
And then we invited 2 other people, and so the first 2 minutes, I thought to myself, this was a mistake. Literally everyone else around the table would say, this person would just go, no. And in that tone, as if to say, oh, you naive little children. Why would you assume that? And that's,
so I take it you're not inviting me back then.
That's right. And that's the thing, right? It's not a matter of, I think the alpha player thing is a myth, because it's just someone transgressing social norms. It's someone being a dickhead. It's someone selfishly monopolizing all the decision space.
Oh yeah. I don't think it's a myth, but it is, so much as it does exist that alpha gamers are out there, but I think they are a social issue and not a design issue.
Well, yeah. I think what it is the myth that there are games that facilitate that.
Yeah.
That's
that games should somehow put a stop to that.
Yeah, because that's not true, because just some people are dicks, right?
Basically, yeah.
But anyway, so the real-time element here, does it feel to you integral to the game, or does it feel like a gimmick?
Actually, in this case, I do think it's integral to the game. I think it's an essential part of the experience. It defines just how the game plays out, how you remember it. It's the reason why it doesn't feel monotonous. It's the reason why you go, where there's this, well, as I said before, there's an up and down. Any game that allows you to sort of go on this roller coaster of emotions is, I think, worth looking at and worth talking about, because one of my biggest criticisms with, even though I don't really use this term often or seriously, multiplayer solitaire games, is that they feel monotonous to a certain extent. They feel like I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. I don't even get the pleasure of interacting with other players enough to it being worthwhile. When there is an up and down where I feel like things change all the time, I love it. Like say in Concordia, I love the way that everything changes with every decision. But when it doesn't, I don't like it. And in Flatline, the real-time element gives it this burst of energy, this moment of sudden adrenaline and immediate decision-making that makes it enjoyable, really.
I love that idea of a game telling us that no matter what you do in your life, no matter how meticulous you are, that it can all just fall to pieces. And I think that's what the real-time element does. You sit there and you plan and you go, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And then under that pressure of time, it can fall apart. And I love that. And I think that's where the heart of the game is.
Oh, no, I agree. I think I love that about games as well. It's why I always snicker at people who object to random elements in games, because this idea that you just laid out, this idea of, you can plan as much as you want. At the end of the day, it's not in your hands. That appeals to me in a game. That I think resonates with what I think about games, about life, really. In the end, then you can plan as much as you want. It's really not in your hands. Games that do that just click with me much better than games that suggest, if you plan ahead well enough, you will succeed. There's nobody can take that away from you.
Well, everyone says that, right? That's a legitimate criticism that most people have. If the game's solvable,
right,
then what the fuck's the point?
Pretty much.
So, what did you think of my interactive, candid photo montage?
Well, it was certainly an experience.
All right, so we talked about this a lot last week.
We did.
And we argued about it.
A little.
As is our want. Group dependency. I think all, as we said, all games are group dependent. I did that poll on Twitter, by the way.
Right.
I think, all games are group dependent to a lesser or greater degree, but I feel that this game, because what you spend actually most of your time doing is planning for that 1 minute.
Right, yeah.
I think that makes this very dependent on liking the people you're playing it with, right?
I don't know. I think much like Pandemic, it demands that the players involved are able to work together. That you have people who are willing to sort of take the lead, but not overstep the boundaries. You need to have players who are willing to follow a lead. If somebody else comes up with a suggestion, they're like, put up a good argument or really convinced or whatever. You need people who are willing to be team players in a way. So do you think that the leader can be a movable feast, or do you think this game works where you have one player who essentially takes on the mantle of team leader and other people, and then other people are able to sort of filter their ideas through their own ideas of acceptance? I think you need more than a leader. Maybe I picked my words badly there. I think more than a leader. More than a leader, what you need is a moderator. What you need is somebody who can sort of collect all the ideas of those people who want to actually give ideas, and then, put them out, put them up for discussion in a way that gets everyone on board. Because, one thing I loved about Pandemic, and I still love about Pandemic, and I keep bringing up when people talk about Pandemic, is that at its core, it's a game about consensus building, like most cooperative games are. And consensus is not something that magically appears out of nowhere because everyone is on the same footing. It's always, a certain dynamic that builds up in a group. You reach consensus because somebody actually decides, no, this is a good idea. We should do this. And then the others either agree or disagree. And then they need to find some sort of compromise in between them.
I think that's really interesting, because what you have, I think, in this, and in a lot of cooperative games, is an ebb and flow. That's been used a lot, isn't it? But yes. you have a sort of, this game has this progression, whereas you're more likely, I think, to argue over minutiae towards the latter stages of the game than you are towards the beginning, because people are more or less likely to sort of go, well, I'll let that go by. I'll let that decision go by. I'll sit back. And the more confident they become, but the more they feel that they're not being listened to, the more likely they are at some point just to go, no. And we had a situation where I argued with another player.
Right.
For 5 minutes.
A bit.
Over nothing. I mean, literally over one symbol. So basically what you're doing is you're trying to assign dice symbols to match with symbols that cover rows that enable you to cure patients. And we had like a 5-minute argument. And I think that is because he felt that he hadn't contributed.
Right, yeah.
Earlier in the game and thought, this is the hill I'm going to die on.
Yeah. No, again, and it comes back to this observation I've had a while back, how when you try to build a consensus in a group, you need to give everyone the feedback that their input is valued, that it's listened to, even if people don't follow it necessarily, which is literally not the same thing. But, you need to get everyone on the same page.
And is this an inevitable structure that people will fall in line with, do you think?
No, I think that's how you end up with alpha gamers. That's how you end up with people who want to know where they need to be, but don't know how to get there.
Which role do you like to assume in this?
I think when I'm the one who knows the game best, I sort of jump into this moderator role. I jump into this idea of like, all right, I know these things because it's been my experience that if you are the host of the game night, if it's your game, people naturally assume you know the game best and will defer whether they want to or not to your judgment, which in some cases in, say, semi-cooperative games or even competitive games isn't that great. Sort of it makes an uneven playing field. But I recognize this is just something people do. So instead of fighting against it and just going, no, I know just as much as you guys, I just go, yeah, sure, I know everything, fine. And then just start the ball rolling and just try to get as much input from players as I can, provided they're willing to give it. And then give them as much, feedback as they can on their ideas, yeah.
And this is the issue I always have with cooperative games. And this happened to me when we played this.
Right.
And I don't think it's a flaw of the game, I think it's a flaw of the concept.
Okay.
It got to a point where it was getting a little fractious between me and this guy.
All right.
And then that kind of does it for me. I'll get to a point where I realize, what the fuck am I arguing over this for? And then I just sit back and go, just do what you want.
Right.
This is my leisure time fundamentally.
Right, yeah.
And that's the problem I have. And it's a group issue. It's not a problem with the game, but I think it's a flaw that a lot of cooperative games suffer from because I won't assert myself. Because it's bloody pointless. I won't fight I won't die on the hill, you know. And so I found this, and this was only in one game. We played it like 4 or 5 times. And it was only in this one game, and I felt it was frustration on the players' part that they hadn't really had their ideas listened to, and so they thought, this is the hill I'm going to die on.
Yeah.
And I found myself then prejudiced against the game, but prejudiced against the people I was playing with for that session.
Oh yeah. No, I think, that's an interesting point though, that of course, nobody's perfect. We're always going to make, the wrong calls in a situation like that. You're going to ignore sort of ask somebody to, not contribute for a moment or going to forego, an idea somebody else said, something like that. Not always, in the best possible way. I think people might get a little, not quite upset and even frustrated, maybe too much of too strong a word, but go like a little disappointment. Let's call it that. Like, oh, I wasn't listened to and now we lost, blah.
And that's what's so interesting about co-op games. I think the way that co-op games model human interaction in a very interesting way, because actually you're not trying to achieve consensus basing people's skill at the game.
Right.
It's whether they felt their boss undermined them that day.
Yeah.
Whether they've slept with their partner in the last week. Whether they've had enough sleep over the last couple of days.
No, I'm not sure I agree with that. I do agree that factors in. Yes, that sort of fuels people's mindset when they sit down to play. But once they are in the game itself, I think the things that weigh in the most is literally what you just described earlier. Are they being listened to? Are they being appreciated? Are they given the feedback by the group that, we value your experience, we value your input, even if we just happen to not go in that direction.
What a game offers you, what life doesn't offer you so often, is the ability to say, I'm going to fucking die on this hill. Life, you can't do that in life. Because if you do, you lose your job and then you're
also dead.
You end up homeless giving hand jobs for crack, right? Whereas in a game...
What? Where did that come from?
That's what I assume what happens when you lose your job, right? Whereas in a game, you can grind the game to a halt. There's no real consequence other than everyone else doesn't have a good time. And so you find this a lot in co-op games. And I think that's a problem a lot of people have with them, because people just go, well, my boss doesn't listen to me. My partner doesn't listen to me. I got cut up on the bloody street going into a roundabout today. I'm fucking dying on this hill.
Well, I think to some extent, yes, people, and I'm not judging here, but people do like to get some sort of social affirmation of who they are, of that they're valued in games. And cooperative games are a great arena for that. And yes, I think the point I was trying to get at earlier is that a lot of these games, and I'm not even sure if these games could offer that, but a lot of these game experiences have a hard time dealing with the fallout from a, let's say, contentious argument.
Is it ever solvable, though?
The argument. Or the fallout.
Can a game legislate for that? Can a game help?
I'm not
with that?
sure. I honestly don't know. I think maybe, but I don't.
It's kind of what do you do? Put fucking opium in the box or something? You know what I mean?
I do remember some games. I think the game I'm thinking of right now is an older indie game, about 10 years maybe. Dogs in the Vineyard. They had these. Well, very quickly. In Dogs on the Vineyard, you are people going into a town trying to solve some sort of crisis there. And that usually involves a lot of moral failings, moral issues. Yes, in a wider sense. And usually it quickly escalates to some kind of violence. But the most important thing, to me at least, the most important thing if you play more than one session is what happens when you leave the town, which is the fallout, which is when people talk about their experiences. And I think it's an important element of that game because it also allows the players to sort of talk about and process what happened in the game. And I think this is a phase of the game experience that board games have not even conceived of, I think.
Right, absolutely.
The idea that in a co-op game that you would sit down and then talk about everything that, all these moments of fraction. You talk about, oh, that was so exciting, or when you did this, I felt like that, which is fine. But these issues like the argument
it's finding a way to codify that into the game rules, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? I don't know. But if you can, that would be a sort of debrief.
Yeah, debrief
would be wonderful. Wonderful experience if you could do it.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most. That's an unmined mine. it's untapped potential of the game experience that designers haven't looked at, I think. And then even in
acknowledging that the game exists other than the game mechanics and what you do.
Yeah, exactly. And especially how we interact with them. It's all left up to the group to deal with the fact that you hold a grudge because somebody destroyed your wheat field, or that somebody completely ignored you in the co-op game and just took away your decision. We are just assumed to have these skills already available to us to talk about these issues or figure them out amongst ourselves because
regardless of the social good, though, I mean, it's a bloody entertaining aspect to a game. If you could factor that into the game and make it part of the game, not just a stupid tacked on thing at the end. If you could integrate that would be wonderful.
So Pandemic Season 3 is what you're saying.
Alright, so how about this? You take a tenuous grasp of reality, a lot of condescension, at least 4 cups, and a slow-wittedness masked through pretensions of prolixity.
Well, that's you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's design.
You say there are tacked-on rules in this game that seem extraneous.
Not quite that. No, I think
then explain.
Again, this is not, to clarify, this is not a deep flaw of the game, but I try to find why I couldn't get excited about this game as much as you apparently did. And I thought about it, and it occurred to me that most games have a part that is explicitly about decision making, explicitly about, setting up stakes, setting up risks, and asking you, the player, to pick a path. And then, as an additional part of the board game experience, there's what I would call setup, what I would call administration. Yeah. Moving things around, placing them here, keeping in mind that extra special rule that's active in this turn, so on and so forth. Generally, the less administration you have and the more decision space you have, the better. Yeah. We call that elegant design. A lot of Euro games are famous for being very elegant in their design, especially compared to, say, early 90s or 80s Ameritrash games which had huge amounts of rules.
The upkeep is massive.
Yeah. And this distinction is what I was reminded of when I sat down to play Flatline, because the core of the game, sort of plot out your strategy, roll dice, and then apply to the individual tasks is sound, is solid, it works. And as we said, it's quite fun, but it needs a lot of administration that's part of the game that I feel could have been simplified. That could have been more elegant, because the game takes up quite a lot of space on the table. And I feel it's somehow the relation between how much time you spend moving things around, rolling dice, drawing cards, thinking, what does this card do? What does that card do? How do we combine this? When do we use that? I thought I felt there was more time spent doing that than there was doing the fun plotting, rolling dice, and quickly placing it somewhere.
You see, what's interesting is I find all of those elements, what are ostensibly setup elements, to be incredibly fun.
Right.
They have made a virtue of setup. Seasons does this. Seasons makes a virtue of setup, getting your initial deck.
Oh, yeah.
Using a really nice draft.
So good.
And I think this does it too. In that, okay, so basically setup every round is you have to draw cards. These can either be sort of emergency things that if you solve them, give you a benefit later on in the game, or just problems, things that come up. Mm-hmm. That you have to solve and get rid of. And you roll these 2 dice, and every round, if they hit these particular cards which you've put on a numbered board, these things will happen and they will cause you issues.
Right.
What I love about that is you draw these cards and they reveal the potential problems. They reveal the potential benefits. And it's that tension of, oh my God, I hope we don't draw any more blue cards because we're fucked if we draw any more blue cards. Or if we draw orange cards, that's great. But the problem with drawing orange cards is we have to solve them, otherwise we'll lose the game. Right. I found all of those elements really contributed to
No, they do.
I find them tense. I find that rather than find it fiddly, I find that they'd made a virtue of setup. They'd integrated it into the tension of the game, and I thought that was really nice and clever.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, to me, that just felt unpolished in a way. I quite appreciate, just from a pure aesthetic point of view, I guess, an elegant game design. Any game that really fuses those moments of setup, decision-making, consequences, long-term planning, short-term planning, interaction, all these elements. Every game that can sort of somehow magically manage to compress it into as little administrative work as possible, I appreciate, just for the pure sake of having achieved that. Regardless of whether I like the decisions I'm making, whether I like the consequences, I just appreciate the fact that it's so well put together. A recent example for that would be the Road to El Dorado, the Quest for El Dorado, it's called. I really liked how it's put together. The game itself is fine. It doesn't excite me that much, but I really like the way it's put together. It's really, really cleverly done. And I appreciate it on that level alone. And Flatline is literally on the other, a mirror image of that.
You see, it's really interesting because I just don't see it. I just don't see how the upkeep was particularly egregious in any way. But we have to talk about the word anytime.
No, you have to talk about the word anytime.
Because you seem to have a real issue with the word anytime.
Yes, but
explain to me why you think... So basically, this stems from the fact that you thought the rules were vague and they allowed you wiggle room that you felt lessened a victory.
Yes, generally I thought that if I feel like I'm gaming the system or I'm interpreting a phrase in a way that benefits me because the game allows me to benefit me. It
gives you an unfair benefit though, right?
It feels like let's put it this way. If I'm given the choice to interpret a phrase a certain way and my desire to win the game obviously leads me towards a certain interpretation of that phrase, I feel like that cheapens it sort of undermines the victory that I might get out of it.
And that's the thing. I find it very confusing, your issue with this. Because basically there's a rule, and so you can explain this in a second. There's a rule that says there are certain cards. When can you play benefit cards to give you a benefit? You get a sort of one-time benefit that can do certain things to help you in the game. And it says you can play them any time, which I took to mean any time.
Right.
Right? What's the issue?
The problem is that's not the issue. That's a symptom. The symptom is an overall experience with the game and the rule book itself, in that it's all very, not vague, but
unrigorous.
Yes, that may be a good
I'm not
way.
even sure that's a bloody word. But...
Yeah, the lack of rigor, basically.
So you felt the rules were flabby?
Yes, in a way. I think draw cards and place them there, and it's like, I feel like too often it seemed to me that triggering a certain card effect or placing a certain card effect was a bit convenient.
Felt cheaty.
Gamey. Let's put it this way. It felt gamey. And it felt gamey in a way that didn't feel intended. I think I think that describes it well. It felt gamey in a way that the design didn't seem to intend. While the rules and the phrasing allowed it, no question. It says anytime, so we can play it anytime. It still felt gamey in a way that, certain other things explicitly weren't.
You see, it's really interesting because I think you often find this. You'll find this when you're playing games sometimes, that some person will use the oft used phrase, well, it doesn't say you can't. And this didn't feel like that to me. All right. It just said, you can use them at any time, which I took. It didn't say, there's a sin of omission here that I'm getting around the rules by that. The rules as written seemed fair and equitable to me. Right. That was the thing. And so I didn't have that sort of queasiness that you did.
I think the simple clarification, like anytime, and then brackets, any phase or even during another action, that would have been fine. That would like the clarification would have been enough to go, all right, it's intended this way. I have no issue with that. But the fact that I couldn't discern the intent, that's the way good way of phrasing it. The fact that I couldn't clearly discern the intent of these rules made me unsure about whether I was using them right.
Right. And so you feel like you're gaining an advantage that is slightly dishonest. Against the spirit of the game.
Yeah, against the spirit of the game. In a way that sort of cheating me out of the victory. It doesn't feel like I won the game the way it was supposed to be won. I won the game because I found a loophole.
And that's the thing, right? It's like porno. It's like the definition of porno, right? I don't know it. I couldn't define it, but I can tell you when I see it.
Yeah, that is actually, porn is actually very, very simple to define.
If a willy goes in of a jan-jan?
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be.
Or a bum-bum.
Yeah.
Or two vajanjans go next to each other. Or two willies go next to each other.
Yeah, basically either holes or willies, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's really interesting because it was a constant, now if I say it was a constant gripe, I was sounding like you were being terribly annoying. It's not the case. But it was something you were constantly talking about.
It occupied my mind. Yes.
Yeah. I feel uneasy about this, which is interesting because it said any time to me. And I just, any time means any time. And so I didn't have an issue. And it's really interesting that you feel the game is inelegant, and I feel it's very elegant. I think it's very, very cleverly put together. And I find the problems I had with the game actually arose more from the people than the game itself.
I think to some extent this may come down to the fact, this might sound a bit, churlish, but it's not meant to be. I sat down to read the rules and try to make sense of the game, and then explained the rules as far as I understood them. And the rules could have been better.
Right.
For a game that's ostensibly fairly simple and straightforward, the rules I felt were not. They had great illustrations that took up a lot of space, but that meant that, I had to go through 3 different pages to get the whole of one basic idea of what to do in the game. And to me, this very much colored the way I experienced the game and the way I could approach the game. And I stumbled over the intention of the rules, as I said. I stumbled over edge cases when they showed up. I wasn't sure where to look them up. I had to basically reread the whole rules again. And this is not about, this is not a big long rant about the rules not being good, but I think the rules, the way they're written, sort of express the idea of the game and also to some extent the care that was put into the game. And this all adds up to my impression of a lot of these rules being sort of put on because there was a need there to make this a big box game. And lots of these elements could have been made easier and clearer and simpler.
And of course, that might be the reason why it didn't affect me in the same way, because I didn't read the rules.
Yeah.
Playing this made me want to play.
All right then, Georgie. What did this evoke in your nostalgia gland in the back of your brain?
It made me want to play, if that is what you're trying to say.
That's what I meant.
Excellent. It made me want to play For Gods, which is a lesser known game by Christoph Berlinger, who did Archipelago, which I really, really like.
So it's about like 6 gods then?
Yes, but 2 are on vacation.
Oh, okay, nice one.
No. But it's always different too.
Oh,
it's the ones you don't see.
Zeus he's in Preston this weekend at the Railway Museum.
As you would, No, it's a real-time game as well. It's a tile-laying game. And much like Archipelago was basically Settlers of Catan on steroids, this is not quite as heavily, but still a decisively house rule version of Carcassonne.
Okay.
So you're placing your tiles there, trying to create a coherent landscape based on 4 different types of landscapes. And one of the funniest things about the game I really like is that you don't commit to one point of scoring until only as you play the game. Basically, you lay out the board, and when you realize, I think the god of the mountains is going to score big, you grab the god of the mountains, and now you're the god of the mountains, and you're responsible you get the most points there. And there's a lot of putting people on it. Like I'm literally saying this is Carcassonne in real time, just, twisted and turned with some special house rules. And it reminded me of Flatline in the sense that you have this real-time element. It's not interrupted. It just keeps going. And you have some sort of challenge, to follow on this thought, there was nothing unclear about Four Gods in the rulebook. There was nothing unclear about Four Gods in the game. Every element is explicitly laid out. This is what it does. This is how it works. This is how you use it. Full stop. Next one. And I think it works surprisingly well. A lot of people sort of avoided the game because, real time, tile laying. But I think it's worth a look. It's nowhere near as stellar as Archipelago is, but then few games are. But I think it's definitely worth giving a try. I think it's really quite decent. And if you like, tile laying games, and if you like the real time element, if it doesn't sort of scare you off, I think it's worth giving it a go.
Yeah, mine's an obvious one. I think the king of real-time games that generates the most fun for the most players in the shortest time.
Is it Tag?
It's Tag, yeah. It's brilliant. It's great because you're running around in real time.
Yeah.
And you've got to touch people and that.
Yeah.
And you get an opportunity to, look up the girls' skirts and that.
Okay.
That's what I did when I was a kid, all right? There's nothing weird.
No. It's fine. Moving on.
Space Cadets Dice Duel.
Right.
Space Cadets Dice Duel. I haven't played it for ages. It's just rollicking good fun. The game system, it's really pared back to the bone. It's all of the, if we're talking, people complained about Space Cadets that it was a little fiddly and a little involved, whereas Space Cadets is just 30 minutes of unrestrained intensity. That's loads of fun. And yeah, I think that's the king of real-time games. But I think Flatline also could stand side by side with it as a prince, maybe.
I think what's interesting is that Dice Duel sort of has an inverted ebb and flow to Flatline. Whereas in Flatline, you spend quite a bit of time plotting and planning, and then you have a burst of energy. In Space Cadets Dice Duel, it's the other way around. You're hurriedly, throwing dice, applying them, trying to get to there somewhere, and then somebody shouts torpedo, and everything stops.
Right. For a minute. And then you go again.
Exactly.
It's absolutely spectacular. So we're going to slightly change this because we've decided that it's not up to us how you spend your bloody money.
Well, that's not true. We do have a Patreon.
Apart from that, we'll come to that later, Georgios.
Right.
Don't want to put it on too thick. But it's not up to us how you spend your money.
You don't want to put it on too thick?
Well, if we're talking Nutella, then yes. But the begging for the money, you wait.
All right, okay, fair enough.
But so we decided, would you recommend this game? Rather than should you go out and buy it? Would you recommend it?
I'm not sure. I think yes. Generally, I think it'll be of interest to people who generally like the idea of a real-time game, but maybe a bit hesitant about the stress of playing like 20 minutes of, intense action, and maybe appreciate this one short minute burst. I think that's what really sets it apart from most, if not all other real-time games, is the small bursts of energy. And then you can sort of sort your head. You can sort of figure out what things are headed and stuff like that. Yes. So if you want to try real-time games and are not sure whether you like how much time you spend, being under pressure, that might be worth a go. If you don't have any real-time games, or even if you do like real-time games, I think it's different enough. But if you're worried about the collection of the size of your collection, not the collection of your sizes, obviously, then I'm not sure it quite deserves a place in everybody's shelf. I think it's good, it's decent, but it's not great.
I really enjoyed this game. I had a lot of fun. It has the issues that co-ops have. If the group is wrong, you're not going to have a lot of fun. If you have one person who decides that today he's going to die on that hill, well, he's going to die on that hill and he's going to bring the game grinding to a halt. But, as you said, this gives you real time in short bursts that doesn't result in a cardiac arrest. It really...
Nicely put, by the way.
Thank you. It really rewards planning. You improve at the game. You get better the more you play it. The first time we played it, I thought this is unsolvable. And we won it by the end through developing solutions together. That's why I think this game is really good. And I would highly recommend it. But, of course, if co-ops ain't your thing, this doesn't remove the problems co-ops have. As summer dwindles to its end, Georgios, the birds put on their winter coats, ready for the oncoming onslaught. We re-energize, we regroup, and we launch into the future with vim, vigour and spunk.
I'm sorry, were you saying something?
How do people contact us?
All right, they can reach us on our website, infoperfected.com. They can write us emails at infoperfected@gmail.com. They can tweet at us on Twitter at infoperfected or Perfected Info. They can find pictures of board games that we took on Instagram. That would be perfect information. They can, if they're as old as we are, use Facebook to harass us, Perfect Information Podcast. And they can go to the Board Game Geek Guild, which is aptly named the Guild of Perfect Information, number 2348. And there they will find threads started by us or even listeners of the show, where they will talk about how much they disagree with everything Ben said.
Indeed. And I wanted to talk, as we rapidly approach our 50th show, nigh on doing this for 2 years now, which is absolutely insane. I want to talk about the Patreon just
I think my Nutella is actually 2 years old in the fridge. Probably should throw it away.
Did you buy it to commemorate the first show we did?
I bought it to eat it and then I forgot I had it.
Well,
so
then
basically, yes.
Eat it. We've got better over 2 years. A jar of Nutella must have got better over 2 years.
That is pretty much how food works, yeah.
Indeed. So I want to talk about the Patreon briefly. And I just want to talk about kind of what we do and the ethos we have. We don't do what is a show that easily generates income. We don't appeal to publishers in the way that we do a long description of many, many different games throughout a show. We aspire to do something that's a little bit different from what everything else is. And a consequence of that, in a sort of sponsorship kind of way, it's less commercial, which is why you are important. We want to improve, we want to move into different areas, and it's the Patreon that will enable us to do this. If you feel that what we do is valuable, is interesting, is unique, and you want more of it, then you can help us by going to our Patreon, patreon.com/perfectinformation, and pledging whatever you can. And also, if you do pledge, I might even give you a big kissy kiss.
See, there you go, undermining the entire concept of, pledging on Patreon. But basically, yes, most of what Ben says is correct. I'm not going to mention which ones aren't, but...
The kiss bit is the most correct bit, though. If you want to kiss, get on Patreon, pledge, leave your address, like a postal address. We're not sending anything out, but leave a postal address, and I'll come round I'll give you a kissy kiss on the face.
Yes, he will come find you. Basically, what we're trying to do is set up a newsworthy story 1 year down the line so we can option the rights to Hollywood and make a lot of money off this weird story of this podcaster who went around kissing people. Though I'm quite certain the film version will turn you into a killer.
Frankly, to be honest, I am so fucking horny all the time that if you want to, I don't need any pretext. Just send me your addresses. I'll come round. I'll give you a servicing. Man or woman, dog or a cat. Say goodnight, Georgios.
I'm going to go find some soap and scrub that image out of my head.